Thank you for joining us today. We've got a special webinar today so that you can learn how to increase your Google visibility. Hopefully, we'll share with you five easy wins for everyone on the call who are funeral directors. So again, thank you for joining us today. If this is your first time joining a Local IQ webinar, let me tell you a little bit about who we are. We are a award-winning multi-channel digital marketing agency, which just means we specialize in SEO, digital PR, paid search, paid social advertising, website design, the full mix. And we're a part of the NewsQuest Media Group with access to more than 200 trusted news brands across the UK. So chances are from your print advertising and local newspapers, which is where many of you may be familiar with our news brands, to your digital advertising, we've got you covered in the full integrated approach. We'll keep today's webinar really practical and straightforward. It's not going to be about technical SEO or complex marketing strategies. It's going to be about helping you understand what's changed in the funeral sector, and especially when it comes to marketing yourselves online, and what actions you'll be able to take and to make an actual difference on the leads that you're seeing in your business. And I'm really happy today because in today's session we've got Sarah Harvey who's joining us. Sarah, welcome, and maybe if you could just share a little bit with our guests about your work with Local IQ and the funeral sector at whole.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. So my name's Sarah. I work alongside Brandon here at Local IQ, but specifically within the funeral director sector. So I spend most of my time working with our FD specialists, talking to funeral directors across the UK, and helping them to create a bit of an understanding of how families are actually finding your services and what's really making a difference locally. So as Brandon said, today isn't about technical jargon. It's simply just about sharing what we're seeing that's working, what's changing, and what matters most when families are making these decisions.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Thank you for joining us today. And just a few housekeeping things. Today's webinar is being recorded, and within about 24 hours, you'll get the slides that we're sharing with you, as well as the recording in your email. So keep an eye out for that. If you have questions along the way, feel free to put it in that same chat or Q&A area where you just introduce yourself. We've got some colleagues who are in the background, and they'll do their best to answer those as many questions as they can. All right, good deal. So let's go ahead and jump in. Sarah, what kind of conversations are you having with funeral directors across the country at the moment?
Yeah, so we're finding that most funeral directors that we're speaking to don't feel like anything has fundamentally changed within their business, but they're feeling an impact with inquiries. So some of the more recent concerns that FDs are sharing with us are that they're quieter than usual, that they're not getting the same volume of calls, or that something just feels different and they're not entirely sure what. So what's really happening behind the scenes is the way that families are finding and choosing a funeral director has changed, particularly online. So what we're going to share today isn't more marketing jargon, it's not technical stuff, but it's just clarity on what's actually changed, why this potentially could be affecting your inquiries, and what practical steps you can take to make a difference.
No, sounds good. And if we zoom out for a second and just look at like what's happening in the market, what are you seeing on the ground right now?
Yeah, sure. So we're seeing a real behavioural shift in the market, in the sense that families are behaving differently than they potentially have in the past. So they're far more informed about the choices available, they're more price aware, and they're more comfortable researching online and before making a decision. So at the same time as that, we've then got direct cremation providers or national providers that have built their entire model around being visible online. So they're investing particularly heavily in things like paid search and SEO, video and content, and website updates. So when a family is searching, national providers are often appearing first, even in areas where they don't have the same local presence as you, or particularly the same personal connection that you would have with your community. So that combination of changing behaviours and increased visibility from national providers and brands is what's creating a bit of pressure in the local funeral director market.
I get it. So it's not just more competition, but it's more like visible competition.
Yeah.
And I think one of the biggest assumptions that I've heard that we hear in the field is that it's not all about price. Sometimes the local funeral operators say, well, I can't beat the prices of like national operators. Are you hearing conversations about that as well?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it comes up when we're talking to local FDs. I mean, price definitely plays a role for sure. There's no arguing that, but it's not necessarily where the problem starts. So what we consistently see is that families aren't always choosing the cheapest option, particularly where it's not visible to them in their search. So they're choosing between the first few options that they can see. So visibility is shaping that shortlist essentially. I mean, as I said, price may well come into play. So once they have their shortlist, that price is going to be a factor in that. But it's not what's shaping that initial list of potential providers for them. So if a family is searching and seeing a national provider or another local competitor, but they're not seeing you, then your competitive pricing, it's just not even becoming a part of the decision. So the real challenge is, are you visible at the moment that families are actually creating their shortlist?
Yeah, I can see that. That's a really important shift because you're not competing on price if you're not even, in that whole consideration set or on that short list as you described. Let's talk about how families are actually making their decisions now. How quickly does this process happen?
Yeah, so I think most people on this call will understand it's a relatively fast process, particularly in comparison to potentially other products that you might buy. Um, but in most cases, families are making decisions between around 24 and 72 hours, and they're often doing that under pretty intense emotional pressure and often without prior planning. So that means that they're not always doing extensive research. They're not comparing lots and lots of providers, and they're choosing from what's immediately visible to them. So most of that happens through pretty simple searches online, like funeral directors near me or direct cremation near me. So if you're not visible in that moment, then the opportunity is gone because there just isn't a second chance to get in front of that family.
So visibility isn't just important, it's also time critical, like you said, to show up within that 48 hours, 72-hour time frame of them doing that initial search and actually making a decision. Can you talk about like what actually has caused this change and just try to explain it as simply as you can?
Yeah, no problem. So the simplest way I can explain it is that Google has shifted from being a traditional search engine that we know and love to more of an answer engine. So instead of saying, here are some websites, go and explore, it's now saying, here's the answer, and here are the business that we trust below that. And that's where something relatively new called AI overviews come into play. So you may have seen those when you're doing a search and you kind of get an answer before the results. They sit right at the top of searches and they often reduce the need for people to actually click through to a website beyond that. So the whole journey through Google is becoming a lot shorter and a lot more controlled.
Yeah, I see that fewer clicks, faster decisions, and more control from Google in that whole process. You mentioned AI overviews, and for anyone who's on the call who may not be familiar with AI overviews, don't worry, we've got you covered. There's a webinar on our website, or you can just click on it when you get this slide deck and watch it. And we explain everything that a business would need to know about Google AI overviews, and we've got others about AI mode and everything. So if you need to get up to speed on that, don't worry, you can just take a look at that. So that's interesting, Sarah. What about how this impacts funeral directors, even more specifically? Can you take us through that?
Yeah, 100%. So this fundamentally changes how visibility for funeral directors works. So historically, searches were mainly about rankings. So the goal would have been to get your website as high up in the results as possible. But Google has essentially redefined search. So increasingly, people are getting answers directly on Google itself without ever having to actually click through to a website at all. So these are what we would call zero-click searches. So instead of searching, checking multiple websites and sort of comparing those options manually, Google is now increasingly trying to first understand the intent behind the search. Secondly, identify which websites have the most trustworthy and relevant information, and then present those answers back immediately at the very top of the search in the AI overview. So that means that visibility is no longer just where do you rank, it's does Google actually trust your business enough to recommend and include you at the top? So Google makes all of these decisions based on things like accuracy, consistency, reviews, the quality of your website, how locally relevant you are, your authority, and your trustworthiness. So for funeral directors, that's even more important because it's such a sensitive, high trust category. So it's much more about being recognized as a trusted local authority rather than simply just ranking for keywords.
Yeah, so in many ways, Google has shifted from being just like a search engine to being more of a recommendation engine. And the question, it seems, becomes, does Google see your business as a trustworthy enough to confidently like put your business in front of
Mhm.
families? And Sarah, how widespread is this?
So it's growing really quickly in terms of AI overview content. So we've gone from around seeing 13% of searches showing as AI overviews to close to 40% in a relatively short space of time. And based on what we're seeing, we believe that this will continue to increase and it's going to become a core part of how Google works. I think the important thing to say here is this isn't something we're telling people to prepare for in the future. It's already happening, and it's impacting your visibility right now.
Yeah, it's already affecting like the amount of inquiries a lot of FDs are seeing. And if you were to make this like really practical, Sarah, what actually influences a FD's visibility right now in this space?
Okay, so the encouraging part of this is it's not necessarily about complex changes that you need to make. Google is just prioritizing the fundamentals or the basics, but more heavily than they ever have before. So things like accurate business details and consistent information and active engagement with things like reviews and updates. They're the signals that are going to tell Google that this is a real, active, and trustworthy business. So when those signals are particularly strong and what will happen is your visibility will improve both in general search like in the listings, but also in those AI overviews.
Yeah, so even just the basic, and this is some businesses will consider this like one of the basic things that you would do, but this is like even more important more than ever now. And when it comes to like showing up in Google and getting Google to serve you to families who are searching right now, they treat the funeral sector a little bit differently than other industries I've heard. Is that right?
Yes, they do. And I'm sure again, a lot of people in the chat may be aware of this, but funeral service falls into a category that Google calls your money, your life, which sounds really intense, and it kind of is. They're industries where the decisions have a significant impact on someone's life or money. So examples outside of our sector would be things like healthcare, financial advice, legal services, but funeral directors are also a part of that mix. So because Google, because of that, Google is essentially applying stricter standards when it decides things like which businesses to show and which information to trust. So for you as a funeral director, this means that accuracy, credibility, and trust matter far more than potentially in another industry. I think it's tricky, but Google is effectively, you're being held to a much higher standard than other sectors because the consequences for somebody searching of a poor choice are far higher. So.
Yeah, I get it. So trust isn't just important, it's actually a ranking factor that Google is using for the funeral sector to determine whether or not a funeral director shows up for some of the results. So at this point, Sarah, I think one of the questions that I'm seeing and comments in the chat is that they're saying, okay, this sounds familiar. And so can you break that down? Like, what are the signs that a funeral director might already be seeing if they're experiencing this shift?
Yeah, so there's a few consistent signals we hear that we can generally attribute to this. So things like our website traffic has dipped, or we're getting fewer calls than we used to, we're seeing competitors appearing ahead of us, or we're just not sure where our inquiries are coming from anymore. I think what's really important is that these changes do often happen gradually. So it's not always that you're going to see a big dramatic drop in any of these things overnight. So you may not have even realized it. But it might be a slow decline of visibility or a slight drop week after week, month after month in inquiries. Um, the biggest problem, though, is that in this sector, your demand is fixed, right? You can't create more funerals. So even a small loss in visibility for you will directly translate into a loss of business. So every small change you can make to improve your visibility is going to be pretty significant.
Yeah, yeah. So it's not even just about losing traffic because it's going to directly impact your revenue. That's I get that connection. And if you were to think about it, Sarah, in terms of like what a business should do next, like where would you suggest they start?
Okay, so the key thing with everything we've discussed and everything we will discuss is it's all really easy to fix. Um, there's no requirement to like completely overhaul your website, and you don't need loads of technical expertise to do it. What it requires is focusing on the areas that Google is already prioritizing. So those fundamentals, those basics that we'll talk about as we go through, and strengthening those signals that influence your visibility and results. So most of you will almost certainly already have the foundations within your online presence. Potentially they may not have been optimized or maintained consistently. So instead of thinking about doing more, adding things, changing things, it's more about just improving what's already there in the right way.
Yeah. So refining and strengthening, not reinventing everything, right? So they can still kind of improve the process while maintaining business as usual. I think that's really encouraging for a lot of people to hear. And I think we've got a nice good framework that breaks this concept down and moves us from theory to, okay, how do I actually action everything that you're talking about, Sarah? And can you take us through this framework that you've got for us?
Yes, completely. So we call this the local visibility framework. So it breaks down into 5 key areas that are listings, online reputation, content and website, authority, and local consistency. So each of these will play a role in how Google evaluates your business, essentially. And they're all connected, so they all kind of need to be at a decent level. When these areas are strong, Google is more confident in showing your business. But I guess more importantly for everyone on the call, families are more confident in choosing you. So this gives you a really clear structure to focus on rather than trying to do everything at once. And we'll go through each of these points.
I like the structure. It's very simple. I would encourage everybody to just write it down, but know that you'll get the slides too to go through this a little bit more at your leisure, especially as Sarah begins to go through it in details, because this kind of talks about how it's not just about SEO, but it's a lot of different things that give a signal to Google to help you increase your visibility in terms of showing up in the search results, the general ones, but also those AI powered search results. So let's start breaking it down, Sarah. I think starting with the L listings, why is the Google Business Profile so important?
Yeah, so the Google Business Profile is one of the most important visibility assets that you have. It's what appears in local search results, in Google Maps, and now more often than ever in the AI overviews. So for many families, this is the first interaction with your business. So if that information is incomplete, if it's outdated, or if it's inconsistent with other things online, um, then it will immediately reduce trust with Google, but also with the person searching for you. So on the flip side of that, if you have a well-managed profile, then that's going to, again, with Google and with families, it's going to reinforce credibility. It's going to improve your chances of appearing, and it's going to make it much easier for families to contact you quickly. And as we've said before, this is a particularly time-sensitive situation, so that that ease of access for families is absolutely critical.
Yeah, yeah. So it's not just a listing; it's the actual digital front door of your funeral home. I think we've all experienced that. You mentioned making sure that it's all up to date. I think we've all experienced where we've searched for a business on Google, and maybe we've called or we went to the business expecting them to be open, but then we find out that they're closed and that the information on their Google profile was just wrong or outdated. And so I mean, if that happens in this sector, especially, I mean, you're immediately pushing them into the care of another funeral operator. So again, it's basics, but it's really important that you take the time to make sure this information is accurate, like Sarah mentioned. And what about online reputation, Sarah? That's the O in the local visibility framework. How should funeral directors think about reviews and their reputation online?
Okay, so reviews are really, really important in this sector, but I appreciate they're probably one of the more challenging things to do. Um, but they are super important and they'll serve two purposes in this whole kind of approach. So firstly, they will influence families directly. So at a particularly emotional time when people are looking for reassurance, reviews are going to provide social proof, they're going to provide emotional reassurance, and they're going to provide ultimately confidence in that final decision. But secondly, they influence Google as well. So they'll act as a signal to Google that says this is an active, trusted business and that people have had real experiences here, as opposed to it not being that case. So when it comes to reviews, they're super important. I think there's one other thing that's overlooked with reviews, and that's responding to them. I appreciate it's challenging, particularly if the review isn't entirely positive. But nevertheless, Google views responding to them as extremely important, and it will show to Google professionalism, it will show engagement, it will show that ongoing activity. But again, for you, most importantly, it's going to show families that you care about them and their experience. But yeah, all of that is going to contribute to trust and visibility on both sides of the coin.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the reviews don't just help people choose uh, you as as a person who's going to take care of their funeral arrangements and for their family, but it's actually helping Google to decide whether or not they should show you as well to people who are searching based off of the feedback that people are leaving on under your profile. So that makes sense. Thanks for sharing that. The C in the local visibility framework, Sarah, is about content and the website. So
Mhm.
moving on to that, what are the key things funeral directors should focus on here?
Okay, so there are three things that your website needs to do very, very clearly. Explain what you offer, which seems pretty obvious, but nevertheless. Secondly, reassure families, and three, make it really, really easy to get in touch. Um, but what we often see is that there's a little bit too much focus on information outside of, packages and offerings, but not enough focus on clarity and reassurance. Um, Families aren't reading every page, unfortunately. They're not in the process of going through every single thing. They'll be scanning quickly and they're looking for three things. They're looking for confidence, clarity, and then the next steps they need to make. So having things like really clear service descriptions and package descriptions, really simple contact options like a click to call button or a form they can fill out, and then reassuring messaging about the process. That's the bit that's going to make the huge difference in whether or not someone picks up the phone.
Yeah, I got it. I mean, people have, thanks to social media, we've got like 15-second, attention spans,
Mhm.
and very quickly you've got to be very clear and give them that reassurance that they need to know like this is the right company for you to support your family during this time, and quickly drive them to the action of completing that inquiry form on your website or picking up the phone and calling. So good points there. Next is that's the A in the local visibility framework authority. Sarah, what does this mean? And again, try to make it as simple as possible for us here.
No problem. So this is all about demonstrating credibility as a business. So in the your money, your life category that I mentioned earlier, Google is looking for signals that say that you are a trusted and established business. So that includes things like how long you've been in operation and your years of experience, of which in the funeral director, some of you have been in business for over hundreds of years. So it's particularly important for you. Your testimonials and reviews, any accreditations or affiliations, so particularly things like SAFE or NAFD, and then community involvement. So these obviously are what Google is looking for, but they don't just help Google. They're going to help families feel more confident in choosing you, which is a win-win, especially when they're comparing those options quite quickly. Um, I think with content and going down that route, another thing to consider here is video. So having engaging and informative video on your site will really help to reinforce your credibility. So video can be extremely impactful in offering reassurance in this market and trust and an overall sense of familiarity, with you as a funeral director and then your business and services as well.
Yeah, I get it. Especially with those areas of video that you mentioned and just content. It's about making your credibility visible and not just assume. Don't just assume that because your company has been around for 100 years or so that people know how credible you all are. You've got to share that with them. You got to communicate it through video by placing your accreditation type logos and other testimonials. All those things you're going to make sure it's front and center on your website so they can see it like within 15 seconds of joining. And finally, Sarah, the final L in the local visibility framework it's for local consistency. Um, is that one that often gets overlooked? And if so, why is it important?
Yeah. So this is arguably the toughest part of this. Consistency is pretty critical for trust, but if we're entirely honest, maintaining consistency, particularly throughout like busier periods or more challenging periods, is just extremely hard. But this is one of those things that will particularly help you stand out against a national operator. So if your business details vary across things like Google, online directories, the social platforms, then Google is going to become far less confident in figuring out which information is correct and ultimately whether or not your business is reliable. Um, and when that confidence with Google drops, your visibility will drop. So consistency is the thing that will reinforce that accuracy, reliability, and trust with Google. And that is what they're prioritizing right now.
Yeah, I can see that. And remember, like Google has AI bots that are searching a lot of different sources for information to serve to people who are searching. And so even small inconsistencies, the AI bots can pick it up. And that can have a really bigger impact, much more than what businesses realize. So you really do want to make sure that the information is as consistent as possible across the board. And like you mentioned, Sarah, yeah, that's kind of hard to do when we have the day-to-day business to take care of as well. So but it's important to keep in mind. So Sarah, all of this has been really great that you've shared this framework, the local visibility framework. If someone wanted to take action like this week, I pride ourselves on the webinars because we try to make it like really actionable for people to say like, what do I need to do right now as soon as I jump off this call? So what would you suggest people focus on? Out of all of what you've kind of talked about today,
Mhm.
if you could make it like really specific.
Yeah, perfect. So I think there's 5 things that I would say are pretty simple and practical steps that you could take, but that are quite high impact in terms of how you'll be viewed by Google, but also by families. So things like updating your Google business profile with the right opening times, the length of service, all of those good things. Um, Asking for some reviews. I appreciate that's not an easy thing to do in this sector. But it is something you need. So finding a way to ask for some reviews, particularly newer ones. Improving your homepage messaging, making sure you have things like a click to call button or a form they can fill out. Adding content around your key services. So content around the packages you offer, but also content around the process, because the process is ultimately the most important thing for a family. So video content, online content, whatever it might be, but some kind of content from that perspective. And then checking your details across all platforms that you're listed on on the entire internet. So all the directories you might be listed on, your Google business profile, all of your socials need to match up. Like they need to be identical and match up. Um, I think that they're kind of my 5 tips, but I think the key point is you don't necessarily have to go away and do every single thing at the same time. But every small improvement you make, as long as it's done consistently, is going to start to improve your visibility over time, but hopefully relatively quickly.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's about progress and not just perfection, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. No, thanks for that quick recap, Sarah. That makes it even more actionable to just kind of focus on one of these 5 things to kind of do this week. I think another thing that people can do, especially if you're unsure about where you stand, I think this is one of the areas that we can help, especially too. I just put the link in the chat. And it's for a free SEO audit of your website, and it gives your business like a clear picture of your current visibility. So it'll show you, like where you're appearing. it looks at any missed opportunities and areas of your website and your whole social online presence that your business probably should put more attention towards. And it even checks your AI visibility across a few different metrics as well. And so what we typically find is that most funeral directors do have opportunities when it comes to their website and their social and digital presence to make some improvements in at least one or two of those areas. And so it's not about guessing. It's about understanding where to focus on next. And so if you want that clarity, I'd encourage you to take advantage of that free SEO audit. You can do it now as we kind of move forward to Q&A. You just go to click that link and then put it in your website. And then within a few minutes, you'll get like a score and a report back to your email. So really easy to do. And so with that, let's go ahead and move to some questions. Again, if you've got questions, some people have submitted some already, either in that chat or the Q&A area. Just submit your question there. And we've got some colleagues in the background who are taking the time to answer those questions. And then Sarah and I are going to answer some live as well. Some individuals sent some questions in advance as well. So we'll try to cover as many of those as we can. Sarah, the first question I've got here is that, so this funeral director says they focus on word of mouth for years, and they're just wondering how does that good old marketing of word of mouth compare to, the value of SEO, because SEO would be an investment that they would have to make. So what would your thoughts be around that?
Yeah, so I hear this all the time, and when we're speaking to our funeral directors, word of mouth is still the single most important thing to them, and it is still incredibly valuable. And for many of you, it's one of the strongest sources of your trust and the referrals that you get. The challenge or the bit to kind of match up to that is that the journey still often starts online now. So that happens even if someone's heard of you before. So what I mean by that is the journey a family might go through today is that they might get a recommendation from a friend or family, and then they will go to Google that business. So if they do that, if they get that recommendation and they Google you and they can't find you easily, or if your online presence doesn't immediately build confidence, then that recommendation is becoming weaker every step they take. So SEO isn't necessarily about replacing word of mouth or your reputation. It's about helping your reputation remain visible in the way that families now search and choose. So in many ways, I guess, good SEO is just simply making sure that your local reputation and that local word of mouth just translates when people take that process online.
Yeah, no, that's a really important distinction, that SEO isn't replacing trust or replacing any of those things. It's just helping trust show up where families are looking. And I mean, they're looking online. So that makes sense. We're talking a lot about, how to help that independent funeral director stand out from those national operators. And one person wrote that I'm seeing in the Q&A area is like, obviously we don't have as much budget as a national operator. So, I mean, can they realistically compete? What advice would you give there, Sarah?
Yeah, so again, we get this all the time. This is a pretty common question when we're talking to our funeral directors, and absolutely, and in many cases, you as an independent funeral director have advantages that a national provider would struggle to replicate. It's just about leaning into those. So Google is increasingly prioritizing things like your local relevance, your trust, your authenticity, and then your local community presence. They're all really important things. And independent funeral directors often already have things like strong local reputations, real community relationships, genuine testimonials, and then your like long-standing local history. These are all things that, like I said, a national provider would struggle to replicate. So the issue isn't necessarily a lack of credibility, it's that those strengths just aren't being communicated online. So that's where SEO and digital PR become really, really important, essentially.
Yeah, and Sarah, you mentioned SEO and digital PR. Can you talk a little bit more about what the difference between SEO and digital PR, especially, if funeral directors need both?
Yeah, absolutely. So They work together, but they do slightly different things. So SEO is focused on helping your business become more visible when people actively search for funeral services. So that includes things like optimizing your website, your Google My Business profile, your reviews, your service pages, and then your local search visibility. Whereas digital PR isn't really something we've touched too much on today, but it supports that by building authority and trust around your business online. So, for example, being mentioned in the local news, being involved with community initiatives online, being involved with charities online, being included or mentioned or writing educational articles, and being a part of kind of that expert commentary. So all of those things will help strengthen your credibility online, both with people and also with Google. So yeah, in a sector like the funeral sector where trust matters like so much more, those authority signals can become extremely valuable and the difference between someone choosing you or not.
Yeah, so SEO helps people find you, helps families find you, and digital PR kind of helps reinforce why they should trust you. I get that. And Sarah, you mentioned we didn't cover a lot about that, but digital PR services are something that we can support independent funeral operators with. And so if you want more information about that, actually, I just put a poll in the chat as well. So I want to encourage everyone to respond to that. And then I think in one of those last questions, you can let us know whether or not you'd like to learn more about any of the services and things that we've talked about, whether it's SEO, digital PR, or paid search or paid social advertising. We can support you there. So thanks for your time in doing that. Okay, one quick last question, Sarah, if you don't mind. And I didn't even think about this one, but we've got a lot of people on the call. This question is about a little bit different, but similar. It says, we are a pet crematorium, and our sector has also been impacted by takeovers from national operators or vets, by corporate groups who have taken over large disposal crematoriums, and it's directing all their local clients. They gave a lot of details, but I think that's the main crux. So,
Mhm.
does this same information that we're talking about apply to pet crematoriums? What advice would you give to that type of funeral operator?
Yeah, I mean it's a great question, and the simple answer is yes. Most of what I've said translates. It's a very similar industry. I mean the market shifted, I believe. So in that industry, I know that a lot of them work with partner services and larger networks, and that owners aren't always aware that they have a choice when it comes to cremation. So, but I think the thing is, a pet owner, just like somebody that's dealing with a loss in a family, is in the same emotional vulnerable state, and they're trusting that their vet will guide them to the right solution. I guess they might not always realize that they can contact a crematorium directly, or that there are sort of accreditations and guarantees and things in terms of standards. I think the key to reaching them during the research phase, i.e., before bereavement or at the moment that they're making that decision,
Yeah.
those are the things that will directly translate. So it's things like SEO, so targeting things like how to choose a pet crematorium or questions to ask about pet cremation, and making sure that you're being found for that kind of content online. So creating educational content that helps owners understand their options and what quality standards look like in that industry. I think PPC can also help if you're not familiar. So Google pay per click, Google Ads with sort of helpful messaging. So if someone's searching for those services, they'll be able to find you. And then digital PR, I won't go into it again because we've just talked about it, but I think that there's quite a lot of topical relevance in that sector right now in terms
Yeah.
of people not feeling completely confident in the industry. So digital PR will go a long way to helping build that trust and credibility for them.
Yeah, no, thanks for that because I didn't even think about that. So,
No.
but it's the same. You're trying to connect with people and families who are trying to make a decisions when they're in a really high emotional, vulnerable state. For a family member, a friend, So, and the thing is, like, how do we make sure that our independent um, franchise and business shows up during that time? And it's also about making sure that you show up. Um, ahead of time as well. And there are ways of doing that to where you can, increase your visibility even when they aren't looking, but so that when they do start looking, you're top of mind. So we've covered a lot here, Sarah. Thank you so much for taking the time, and thank you to our colleagues in the chat who are also answering questions, and everyone who's joined us. Kind of one of those difficult topics to talk about sometimes because of the sector, but it's a needed conversation, right? And I think it's evident that businesses need help because everyone here is on today's call. So I want to encourage you to answer the poll that's in the chat. Let us know if we can be helpful, because we've talked broadly about a lot of things, but we can be even more specific about your unique challenges if we connect with you directly. And so we're more than willing and happy to do that. Sarah, again, thank you for your time. And for all of those who are on our call today, we look forward to chatting with you soon, maybe even on another future webinar. So see you soon.